Greetings, everybody. Chris Hislop from the Montana World Affairs Council. Welcome to another episode of Global Perspectives on Security. This is our international affairs webcast where we zero in a little bit tighter on an international security situation. And for nearly the past year, we've been looking at Ukraine with our friend Mick Mulroy. Mick is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, a retired CIA paramilitary operations officer, and United States Marine. He's a national security analyst and co-founder of the Lobo Institute and a board member at the Plato Institute in Athens, Greece. Mick, it's been a couple weeks since we spoke, but still a lot going on. Mick, I'd like to kick it off here. Just looking at the situation of in the news, Russian targeting of civilian infrastructure, electricity, gas, water, and so on. Maybe a month ago, we talked about the potential international criminal court ramifications and the laws of war. Could you bring us up to date? Because the news these days has a pretty massive bombardment continuing across the same line. Over to you.
Absolutely, Chris, and good to be back with you. It is very clear that the Russian war plans were essentially centered around committing war crimes. I mean, not for the sake of committing war crimes, but basically they would like to terrorize the population so that the Ukrainians would give in to their desires to take over their country. It's very clear that the Ukrainian people are nowhere near that, and every time they attack them, only get more tenacity, quite frankly, to endure what they have to defeat the Russians and throw them out of their country. So it's not going to work, but it's become clear that the Russian military cannot beat the Ukrainian military conventionally. They failed at every strategic objective. They're obviously not going to take Kyiv, and now they're losing ground not only to the territory that they've taken since this kicked off in February, but actually it's potentially they could lose territory that they've taken going all the way back to 2014. So this, to your point of your question, targeting civilian infrastructure is a war crime. You can target infrastructure that deals with the military. Of course, they unlawfully invaded the country, so there's essentially nothing they can do that's within the law of armed conflict now. But they are deliberately attacking civilians. They are trying to make civilians' life as miserable as possible in the dead of winter, and it is a substantial winter over there, and it's going to make life miserable there. But I do not see the Ukrainians changing anything about their willingness to fight the Russians to the end.
Mick, let's pick that up on the winter. We know that in Ukraine, they have a similar winter as we have here, snow, cold, and that the civilians across Ukraine are now facing an incredibly difficult winter with a dramatically reduced or completely absent electricity, gas, water, you name it. So Mick, what does this mean, and what can history tell us about when two conventional armies now are squaring off? Here comes winter, things maybe tend to slow down, but maybe to the layperson it looks that way. But using your expertise, what can you tell us about what winter means for the conflict in Ukraine?
So it will likely slow down a bit. Part of it is because of the weather. It is more difficult to move around. It is, of course, more difficult for the soldiers to exist in the field, although they are. But it does make them, quite frankly, less and less capable, all the way down to the individual foot soldier level. But that said, the Ukrainians are going to take every possible advantage to take back any territory they can, because this is essentially an existential issue to them. For the Russian soldiers, most of which do not want to be there, most of which are not trained to be there, it's the exact opposite for the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians, they have no choice. It's either they fight or there's no Ukraine. And they are getting trained by the United States military. They've been trained by us, quite frankly, for many, many years. And they fight like us now, which is, I'm obviously biased, having been a member of the military, US military, but it's far superior than the way the Russians fight. The Russians fight, one general makes all the decisions, nobody else makes decisions. And if that general should not be able to communicate or be killed, then essentially nobody else knows what to do. That's the opposite of the way the U.S. fights. We give soldiers all the way down to the junior NCOs the ability to make decisions on the battlefield, because that's what is required on the modern battlefield. And I think that's what we're seeing when it comes to Ukrainians' success out there. And they're going to push through this winter trying to gain as much as they can. And we're seeing even some forays into Russia. They took out basically strategic bombers of the Russians close to Russia. What looks like, and I don't know, but what the media is reporting, a special operations mission that went behind enemy lines, in this case Russia, and then used drones to take out these. Very impressive. I mean, there's so many things going on in this war, but that probably will be studied later as a mission when it comes to special operations missions, to be able to do something that bold and have that big of an impact.
Mick, in the last 30 seconds or a minute or so, do we also then expect Russia to resupply and rearm over the winter in preparation for another onslaught in the spring?
Yes, so they're going to do everything they can, and that includes reaching out to their traditional allies, North Korea, Iran, to gain as many weapons and munitions and equipment as they can, because they have lost an incredible amount of personnel and equipment. That's one of the reasons why people were somewhat concerned about Victor Bout, who was released, obviously for Brittany Griner this last week. Victor Bout is a famous, or infamous, I should say, arms dealer. I don't think he's going to be able to just slip right back into that. I think he's extraordinarily dated. So I would disagree a bit with my analyst partners on that. But that's one of the reasons they were concerned, because Russia has to focus on gaining more weapons, more munition, and more weapon systems.
Thanks a lot for that, Mick. And let me quickly thank the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Stockman Bank, and Allegiance, who help us bring this and so many more programs to you. Mick Mulroy from the Lobo Institute, thank you very much for your expert analysis on the situation as always. We'll talk again in a couple weeks. Until then, everybody, be well. Bye-bye.